Lots of people are talking about transformation. Keir Starmer's being tasked with transforming Britain, and that's from the pages of the Daily Telegraph. The Environment Agency has proclaimed a transformation of regulation of the industry, which I hope implies less pollution rather than more. Prime Minister Netanyahu has, we're told, transformed Israeli politics, though whether you think that's for the better or the worse might depend on where you come from. Meanwhile, a Google search of church transformation returns nearly 196 million results in a fraction of a second. I dare say some of them might prove helpful, but possibly less than all 196 million. So what does this all mean? Well, in part, it's a rhetorical style. It reveals the pressure on leaders and institutions for dramatic results, to have significance, to shape their own destiny. Without doubt, it shows a perceived need for change and improvement. What change and what improvement? Well, that's maybe more a matter of contention. Transformation, of course, runs throughout John's Gospel. In chapter 1, the greatest transformation of them all, the Word became flesh. And those who receive this living Word, we are told, become children of God. In chapters 20 to 21, Jesus, the crucified, comes back in resurrection. His very first miracle transforms water into wine. Later, a blind man sees. But his greatest sign will be tearing down the temple and rebuilding it in 3 days. In other words, his death and resurrection will transform our approach to God. In chapter 6, we have another miracle of transformation. The feeding of 5,000 people with just a few rolls of bread and a couple of fish. If Jesus' ministry is one of transformation, then the church today is also called to be part of this transformational work. This feeding miracle in the middle of the gospel helps us understand just what that means. The first and most important lesson from this miracle is that Jesus is at the centre. This story is found in all 4 Gospels, but whereas Mark and Luke don't mention Jesus by name at all, and Matthew only twice, John mentions him 6 times in a narrative of comparable length. There are many agencies of transformation in the world, but when the church is transformational, it's because Christ is at work in our midst. Here in John chapter 6, Jesus defines the task. He directs his disciples, and food is distributed. Others are involved, but Jesus is the centre and the lead. Secondly, Jesus includes us in his work. Although Jesus already knew what he was going to do, we're told, he involved his disciples by asking Philip a question: where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat? It's a challenge to our normalised ways of thinking. The answer is, of course, it's just not possible. Nobody remembered to put it in order with Tesco's, and anyhow, that wouldn't be enough. There's a major logistical exercise needed here. Jesus is extending his disciples' understanding of what is possible, and also inviting them to be part of the solution, to be collaborative with one another, but also, of course, with him. And this collaboration is infectious. Andrew soon finds a lad with a few loaves and fish, and that's enough to pump prime events that will then unfold. For you and me today, to fulfill our calling, we need to be prayerfully listening for the questions by which Jesus involves us. Then we need to find ways of involving one another. Thirdly, Jesus' transformation always points beyond itself. The feeding is set in the context of the Passover, an event John mentions in each year of Jesus' ministry. In the first year, with the wedding at Cana in Galilee, he says, "My hour has not yet come." It's chapter 2, verse 4. Before the last, he says, "The hour has come." That's chapter 12, verse 23. In today's passage, the Passover was near, we are told. And Jesus looks up, as if he's checking a clock, and he sees the crowds. In chapter 2, the miracle of the wine foreshadowed his poured out blood at the ultimate Passover. In chapter 6, the miracle of bread foreshadows his broken flesh at the ultimate Passover. Any transformation achievable in this world may be of immense value, but there's always more that it points towards. So what should we do with this passage? Just pass it over as another nice Jesus story, one that's great for Sunday schools, or allow it to go on asking questions of us? Firstly, Jesus looked up and saw the crowd. What situations do you see when you look up around you? Secondly, Jesus knew his plan and was at the centre of implementing it. How do you ensure that your plan is his plan? Thirdly, how will you involve other people, both from the core and the periphery, and maybe also from beyond the body of your church? And fourthly, as you consider how Jesus and you might engage with your situation, what are the ultimate truths your engagement points towards? So in other words, what's going on in the world around you, your community and further afield, that you think Jesus would spot and want you to get involved with? Maybe, together with some other church members, you could go and find a copy of each national newspaper for the day. What stories do they each speak about, and how do they tell them? There'll be differences in the way they each report the same story, sometimes vast, sometimes subtle, and those will tell you a lot about the prejudices of the particular paper. But they can also prompt us to recognise our own prejudice on these and other issues. What would a Christ-like telling of these news stories look like? And what could your Christ-like response to them be? But let's also remember, so many situations need transformation. We can be tempted to think that anything's better than nothing, but Jesus did sometimes choose retreat to the mountains over, say, being made king. God's ways are not always ours, so we need to keep Christ at the centre of our lives, our worship, our thinking, and most certainly our doing. Amen.